Imagine, just for a second, that you are the global spokesperson for a cause.
Okay.
You are the absolute face of it, right? Millions of people look at you and they see the very embodiment of your organization's product. But secretly, like behind closed doors, you carry this agonizing, decades-long fear that the core product you're selling to the entire world doesn't actually exist.
Wow. Yeah, that is, I mean, it is a terrifying psychological burden to even consider.
Right.
You're talking about carrying a weight of hypocrisy, or well, at least the terror of hypocrisy that almost no one on earth could relate to.
Exactly. And we aren't talking about like a CEO selling software here. Today's deep dive is about Anjezi Gonsha Bujaksiu, better known to the world as Mother Teresa.
Yeah, the ultimate global icon of piety.
Right, of radiant faith. Yet, as her private letters later revealed, she lived through a shocking 50-year crisis of faith, just a profound, secret, inner emptiness.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. So looking through the source material on her life, the biographies, the historical records, those private diaries, we want to uncover the actual human story of a woman who left home at 18, built an absolute empire of charity, won a Nobel Prize, drew fierce controversy, and lived a double life of spiritual darkness.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's go back to the beginning. Because, no one's actually born a saint.
What's fascinating here is that Mother Teresa's story is fundamentally about this intense tension between public perception and private reality.
Mm-hmm.
We have this sort of stained glass image of her. But to understand her, you really have to look at the geopolitical reality she was born into. So she was born in 1910 in Skopje.
Which is part of the Ottoman Empire back then, right?
Exactly, to a Kosovar Albanian family.
Huh.
And she was raised in this devoutly Catholic home, but her childhood was just shattered early on.
Yeah, the sources talk about this trauma when she was only 8.
Right. Her father, who was deeply involved in local Albanian community politics, died suddenly. And the historical sources point out he was likely poisoned.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, an act attributed to Serbian agents.
That is just a colossal trauma for an 8-year-old, like to lose your father to political violence. But she seemingly finds a lifeline, a sort of anchor, pretty quickly after that.
She does, yeah.
By the time she's 12, she is completely captivated by stories of missionaries working in Bengal. And she doesn't just, read about them, she acts. By 18, she makes this massive, life-altering decision.
Right, in 1928.
Yeah, in 1928, she leaves home to join the Sisters of Laredo in Ireland, specifically just to learn English so she can become a missionary in India.
And we really have to pause on that departure because the geopolitical shifts of the 20th century turn that choice into an absolute heartbreak.
It's so sad.
It is. When she walked out the door at 18, she would never see her mother or her sister ever again.
Stop and think about that for a second. You say goodbye to your family at 18, assuming you'll visit, or, they will, and you literally never cross paths again. How does that even happen?
Well, it was entirely out of her control. After World War II, Albania fell under the incredibly strict communist rule of Enver Hoxha.
Right.
Under his regime, religion was ruthlessly suppressed. State atheism was enforced. So because she was a Catholic nun, Mother Teresa was labeled a dangerous agent of the Vatican.
Just because of her vocation.
Exactly.
Hmm?
She was repeatedly, aggressively denied entry back into Albania.
Even though, and this is crazy, multiple countries and diplomats petitioned on her behalf as she grew more famous.
Yeah, it didn't matter.
There is a gut-wrenching quote from her in our sources. She's leaving an embassy, crying, and she says, "Dear God, I can understand and accept that I should suffer, but it is so hard to understand and accept why my mother has to suffer. In her old age, she has no other wish than to see us one last time."
That's heartbreaking. But the regime didn't care. Both her mother and sister died during Hoxha's rule.
Oh, man.
She wasn't able to visit Albania until 1989, years after Hoxha died, and the communist regime was beginning to collapse. She had to live her entire adult life with that door completely nailed shut.
So, cut off from her past, she pours herself entirely into her new life. She arrives in India in 1929, takes the name Teresa after Thérèse de Lisieux, the patron saint of missionaries, and she spends nearly 20 years teaching at a convent school in Calcutta.
Right, a very stable life.
Exactly. By all accounts, it was a comfortable, safe environment. She was highly respected, eventually becoming the headmistress, which brings up, honestly, the most perplexing pivot in her story. How do you go from teaching privileged kids in a safe, walled convent to begging in the absolute poorest, most dangerous slums on earth?
It's the defining question of her life, really.
Right. It's not just quitting a corporate job to start a startup. It's quitting your job, burning your bank account, walking into a disaster zone without a phone, and deciding you're going to survive purely on the generosity of strangers who are already starving.
Yeah.
What pushes someone to do that?
To understand the mechanics of that leap, you really have to look at what was bleeding through those convent walls. The 1940s in Calcutta were apocalyptic.
Yeah, they were.
First, you had the Bengal famine of 1943, which killed millions and brought unimaginable starvation right to the city streets. Then, in August 1946, you had Direct Action Day.
Let's break that down because, Direct Action Day, it sounds like a generic historical term, but on the ground, it was an absolute nightmare, wasn't it?
A total nightmare. It began as a political protest by the Muslim League demanding a separate nation, but it rapidly spiraled into massive, unchecked communal riots between Muslims and Hindus across Calcutta.
Wow.
The city was practically paralyzed, supply lines were cut off, the streets were literally filled with thousands of corpses.
Yeah, you can't just grade geography papers and pretend the world isn't ending outside your window.
You really cannot. And this horrifying, visceral context is what triggered her pivotal epiphany. On September 10th, 1946, amidst all this lingering devastation, she was on a train to Darjeeling for an annual retreat.
Right, the famous train ride.
Exactly. During that ride, she experienced what she later called the call within the call. She didn't frame it as a gentle suggestion from God. She described it as a direct, undeniable order.
An order?
An order to leave the comfort of a convent and live among the poorest of the poor.
She actually said, to fail would have been to break the faith. So in 1948, she actually acts on it. She replaces her traditional Loreto habit with this simple white cotton sari with a blue border.
The iconic looks.
Right. She adopts Indian citizenship, gets a few months of basic medical training in Patna, and just walks into the slums.
And the physical and psychological toll of those early days cannot be overstated. She had no massive charity backing her yet. She had no income.
Nothing.
Her diaries from this period are incredibly raw. She wrote about walking the streets until her arms and legs physically ached, just looking for basic food and shelter for the people she was trying to help while she herself was starving.
I think my favorite detail from the sources is that she wasn't a superhero about it. Like, she admits she was deeply tempted to quit.
Yeah, the tempter.
Yes. She wrote about being tempted by the tempter, basically the voice of doubt telling her to just go back to the Loreto convent. The tempter was saying, you have only to say the word and all that will be yours again.
Right.
A warm bed, guaranteed meals, safety.
It's a profound human moment. The physical pain of the slums versus the psychological comfort of giving up. But she pushed through that temptation. By 1950, she officially gets Vatican permission to found her own congregation, the Missionaries of Charity.
And 2 years later, in 1952, she opens her first hospice. With the help of Calcutta officials, she converts an abandoned Hindu temple into the Calcutta Home for the Dying. But let's clarify exactly what this place was, because it becomes the center of a massive debate later on. This was not a facility for high-tech, modern medicine.
Far from it. The mission was fundamentally about human dignity at the end of life. She was taking in people who had been found dying in the gutters, covered in maggots, people who the regular hospitals had completely turned away.
She famously said it was about allowing people who lived like animals to die like angels loved and wanted.
And that dignity was provided strictly in accordance with the patient's own faith, which is an important detail.
Right, yeah.
Muslims were read the Quran, Hindus received water from the Ganges, and Catholics received the last rites. It was about spiritual comfort as much as, or even more than, physical comfort.
The impact of this work was so visceral that the organization just exploded. By the 1960s, she's opening houses in Venezuela, Rome, Tanzania, and eventually the South Bronx in New York.
Yeah, it went global.
By 1997, the Missionaries of Charity had grown to over 4,000 sisters worldwide. Here's where it gets really interesting. How does a nun doing incredibly grim work in the slums of Calcutta become a household name, an international superstar?
Well, the catalyst for that transformation is the media. Specifically, in 1969, an agnostic BBC journalist named Malcolm Muggeridge traveled to Calcutta to film a documentary about her called Something Beautiful for God.
The story of this documentary shoot is wild. There's this technical accident that basically alters the trajectory of her whole life.
It really does. They were filming inside the home for the dying, which, as you can imagine, was incredibly dark. Small windows, very little natural light.
Right.
The camera crew was convinced the footage would be completely black and unusable, but they happened to be testing a brand new ultra-sensitive Kodak photographic film stock.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and when they developed the footage back in England,
Hmm.
the interior shots weren't just visible, they were incredibly well lit, almost radiant.
See, a rational person, or like the camera crew, looks at that and says, wow, Kodak made a great new film stock.
Exactly.
But Muggeridge, who is on this intense personal spiritual journey at the time, completely rejects the technical explanation. He declares it an actual miracle.
Yeah, he does.
He goes on the record saying it's the miracle of divine light emanating from Mother Teresa and her work.
And that framing was incredibly powerful. You contrast the gritty, horrific reality of a Calcutta slum with this glowing, radiant film footage, and you have instant visual mythology.
That's a great way to put it.
That documentary, and the book Muggeridge wrote afterward, catapulted her to global fame. She went from a respected local figure to a worldwide celebrity almost overnight.
Which brings us to the zenith of her public recognition and, well, the incredible weight of the scrutiny that inevitably followed. Now, when you read these sources, you realize you have to hold two entirely conflicting truths in your head at once.
Very true.
We are looking at fierce, unwavering defense on one hand and brutal, systemic criticism on the other. And our goal today is to look at both without stepping onto either soapbox, to just understand the full scope of her legacy.
Right. The reality is the higher her profile rose, the more intensely her methods, her finances, and her political associations were examined.
Yeah.
The scrutiny really peaked in 1979 when she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
And she handled the Nobel in the most Mother Teresa way possible. She flat out refused the lavish conventional ceremonial banquet that usually honors the laureates. She asked that the $192,000 it would have cost be diverted entirely to the poor in India. And her acceptance speech gave us that incredibly famous line. When asked what we can do to promote world peace, she said, "Go home and love your family."
On the surface, a universally beloved moment. But underneath, a very vocal wave of criticism was building, primarily from the medical community.
Okay.
A major paper by Canadian academics, including Serge Larrivée, looked at her clinics and pointed out a glaring disparity. Her organization was receiving millions of dollars in global donations, yet her clinics lacked systematic medical diagnosis, basic necessary nutrition, and sufficient pain relief.
Hold on, so if she's receiving millions in donations, the critics are asking, where is the money going? Like, why aren't they building state-of-the-art hospitals?
Exactly.
Larrivée and others argued that she promoted a cult of suffering. They claimed her theological belief was that the sick must suffer like Christ on the cross, and therefore, alleviating that pain with modern medicine wasn't the primary goal.
This specific critique was amplified dramatically by skeptics like the British journalist Christopher Hitchens. Hitchens was brutal in his assessment.
He really was.
It wasn't just name-calling, it was a fundamental philosophical disagreement. He called her a friend of poverty. He argued that she wasn't actually trying to cure poverty by empowering people, especially women, but rather that she viewed poverty and suffering as a gift from God.
Hitchens even pointed out what he saw as extreme hypocrisy. He noted that when Mother Teresa's own health failed later in life, she didn't just lie in a cot in Calcutta, she sought out advanced, state-of-the-art heart treatment for herself in Western hospitals.
Yeah, that was a major sticking point for critics.
And this criticism wasn't limited to Western journalists. Arup Chatterjee, a physician born in Calcutta, was furious about the narrative she created. He claimed she wildly exaggerated the scale of her work and unfairly painted his hometown to the entire world as merely a city of lepers and beggars, damaging its reputation for decades.
Beyond the medical, there was severe political and social backlash, too. She was heavily criticized for her associations. She accepted honors and donations from the dictatorial Duvalier regime in Haiti.
Oh, wow.
In 1994, she wrote a letter defending Donald McGuire, a Jesuit priest who was later convicted of sexually molesting multiple children, using her influence to push for him to be reinstated to the ministry.
There was also fierce backlash from abortion rights groups over her unyielding stance on reproduction. In her actual Nobel Peace Prize lecture, Standing in Front of the World, she singled out abortion, calling it the greatest destroyer of peace today.
So you have this immense, multifaceted wave of criticism. But there is a very robust defense from her supporters, her biographers like Nevin Chawla, and those within her organization, like Sister Mary Prima Pirik.
Right.
They push back incredibly hard against the medical critiques. They point out that her homes were never intended to be substitute hospitals.
That's the crux of their defense, isn't it?
Yeah.
They argue these were hospices for the discarded. They were literally the places for the people that actual modern hospitals had already rejected and thrown out onto the street to die.
Exactly.
The supporters say if someone needed hospital care and could be saved, the sisters took them to a hospital. They weren't trying to replace the medical system. They were catching the people falling through its cracks.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the entire debate really hinges on a profound disconnect in expectations. The modern world wanted her to be a secular social worker, running a highly efficient, heavily audited 21st century NGO. But that was never who she was, and she never claimed to be.
Exactly. I mean, consider what that means. Are we judging a first-century style religious missionary by the standards of a modern healthcare administrator?
What?
She literally told Christopher Hitchens to his face, "I'm not a social worker, I do it for Christ." She wasn't trying to solve the systemic macroeconomic issues of India. She was trying to save souls and offer a hand to hold for the dying.
And that deeply religious framing, "I do it for Christ," is exactly what makes our final act so startling. Because while she was telling the world she did it all for him, internally, her private diaries reveal she felt completely abandoned by him.
This is the secret darkness. When I read about these letters in the sources, it completely reframed her entire legacy for me.
Yeah, it changes everything.
After her death, her private correspondence with her spiritual advisors was compiled into a book called Mother Teresa, Come Be My Light. And they revealed that for nearly 50 years, she suffered a massive, agonizing crisis of faith.
The language she uses in these letters is devastating. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of doubt.
No.
She wrote, "Where is my faith? Even deep down, there is nothing but emptiness and darkness." She goes on to say that when she tries to raise her thoughts to heaven, the emptiness is so great that those thoughts return like sharp knives and hurt her very soul.
She spent decades smiling for the cameras, accepting awards, telling the world about the radiant love of God while feeling absolutely nothing inside. The hypocrisy of that terrified her.
It really did.
She begged her superiors to destroy these letters. She explicitly said she didn't want people to read them because she was worried, quote, "People will think more of me, less of Jesus."
This raises an important question about the nature of faith itself. When the letters were published, some secular critics pointed to them as the ultimate proof of her hypocrisy, that she was selling a product she knew was fake.
Right.
But within Catholic theology, this was viewed entirely differently. We have to unpack the concept of the dark night of the soul.
Right, because that sounds like just having a really bad depressive episode, but theologically it's much heavier than that, isn't it?
Much heavier. It's a phenomenon experienced by other prominent saints, including her namesake, Therese of Lisieux, who called it a night of nothingness. A dark night of the soul isn't just having a bad day or minor doubt. It is the terrifying, visceral sensation that the God you have dedicated your entire existence to has completely and utterly abandoned you.
That's terrifying.
It is. The theological belief is that God withdraws the feeling of his presence to test the believer. Do you only love God because it feels good? Or will you continue to serve him even when you get absolutely no emotional reward?
I see.
To the Vatican, pushing through that agonizing 50-year silence to continue serving the poor was proof of heroic virtue, not a lack of faith.
The Vatican clearly viewed her endurance of that darkness as superhuman, because her path to sainthood moved incredibly fast after she died in 1997. Pope John Paul II waived the usual 5-year waiting period. In 2003, she was beatified.
And beatification requires the Church to recognize a miracle attributed to her intercession. They recognized the healing of Monica Besra, an Indian woman with an abdominal tumor. Though, keeping with the theme of her life, even the miracle was highly contested.
Yeah, the sources note that Besra herself claimed a beam of light from a locket with Mother Teresa's picture cured her. But Besra's own husband and some of the medical staff who treated her went on record stating it wasn't a miracle at all.
Right.
They said it was the 9 months of conventional tuberculosis medication she took that eradicated the cyst.
Despite the debate, the Vatican proceeded. Years later, a second miracle was recognized by Pope Francis, involving the unexplained healing of a Brazilian man with multiple brain tumors. And so, on September 4, 2016, in front of tens of thousands of people in St. Peter's Square, she was officially canonized as St. Teresa of Calcutta.
So what does this all mean? We started by talking about the tension between the public icon and the private reality. We've looked at an Albanian girl locked out of her homeland who became an Indian icon, a woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize but faced brutal criticism for her medical practices and her political stances, a global symbol of radiant faith who harbored an agonizing, silent 50-year doubt.
It forces you to reflect on your own life, really, and what drives you. Think about the hardest things you do. Usually we rely on a sense of internal satisfaction, a spark of motivation, or a feeling of doing good to keep us going.
Right, that dopamine hit.
Exactly. The question her life poses is, how do you keep showing up day after day, decade after decade, to do grueling, physically exhausting work surrounded by death when that internal spark or good feeling completely vanishes?
And that leads me to this final thought for you to mull over. Philosophers have debated for centuries if true altruism even exists. Do we only do good things because deep down it gives us a dopamine hit?
Yeah.
Because it makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside? Or because we think it secures our place in heaven? If Mother Teresa spent 50 years doing the most grueling labor imaginable, and her secret letters prove she felt absolutely no warmth, no comfort, and no spiritual reward from God while doing it, wait, does that actually make her life the purest, most selfless form of charity imaginable?
It's a heavy thought.
It is.
Yeah.
Think about that the next time you see that stained glass image. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.